Hello and welcome to Sri Raj IS. My name is Shashank Roy, and this is another article, India's supply chain weakness exposed. So this is coming from the Hindu article, How to Secure India's Supply Chain, written by Anand Goenka, President of Federation of Indian Chamber of Commerce, and published in The Hindu on 30th of March. So I have expanded this article. This editorial has been expanded into a standalone topic, which will give you every information that you need related to supply chain. So here it is. UPSC syllabus integration is here. The supply chain will be a part of GS paper 2, GS paper 3, GS paper 2 India and global supply chains, bilateral and regional economic cooperation. In GS paper 3, it will be a part of GS paper 3, industrial growth and manufacturing. In essay or interview, the question may come from globalization or self-reliance or a resilient supply chain. Let's understand, what do you mean by supply chain? What is the meaning of supply chain? The supply chain Investopedia definition says a network between company and its suppliers to produce and distribute a specific product to the final buyer. It includes different activities, people, entities, information and resources. This is the definition of supply chain. Understand the supply chain into different way. Look at this food chain versus food web. Now food chain is linear, it is in a line, right? It is linear, whereas food web is web. It is a complex connection, interconnection or interaction between different species in a food chain, right? In a food, so this is the basic difference between food chain and food web. Now look at the food chain. Let's suppose, what will happen if the frog is eliminated or if the grasshopper is vanished? What will happen? The entire food chain will collapse. At the same time, this is a food web, right? There are apex predator, there are primary consumers, there are grasses. What will happen if the grasshopper or the grass is completely destroyed or vanished? In the same way, the way you can see that every person, every creature, every species is playing an important role in sustaining this entire food chain, or here a food web. In the same way, supply chain. So when, let's say, you have to create a shoe, you have to make a shoe, right? You need materials, different materials. You have to assemble, you have to collaborate with different producers or suppliers. You have to connect with different markets. There will be storage, there will be transportation network. You need different modes of transportation and network as well. So understand this food web and food chain. Now look at this one. This is the source, this is the produce, this is the transport, this is the distribution, this is the delivery. This is how the final delivery will take place. But before final delivery to take place, there are multiple nodes, and this is what is known as supply chain. Let's have a look at another material. Raw material, then it will be transported to supplier, then supplier will transport to manufacturer, manufacturer will transport to distributor, distributor to retailer, and retailer to consumer, and then again demand will go to raw material. In the same way, if you look at, this is e-commerce company, there are product orders. The product will be delivered to warehouse. From warehouse, it will be shipped. From shipping to customer, and the customer will again log on to Amazon Prime and order something. So this is how supply chain works. Let's suppose, due to some problems, manufacturing is disturbed, or supplier is not working, or raw material resources are scarce. What will happen? The entire supply chain will collapse. Now why are we talking about this particular article? We are talking about this particular article because the West Asian crisis, because of the US-Iran, because of the US-Iran conflict or war, has exposed the vulnerabilities of India's supply chain. Supply chain of India has been impacted negatively. You talk about LPG, you talk about LNG, right? You talk about crude oil as a whole. You talk about fertilizers, right? So this exposes India's supply chain or India's strategic reserve as well. Now look at this advertisement. The government is talking about, under the visionary leadership of Prime Minister and the esteemed guidance of Honorable Union Minister of Home Affairs, nano fertilizer empowering Indian agriculture. Now I don't know how and why this advertisement is coming, but one thing is for sure, that there is a fertilizer crisis in India. There is a fertilizer crisis in India, and this advertisement is coming to pacify people. Now let's look at what is the supply chain. The definition is, supply chain is the entire network involved in producing and delivering a product from raw material to manufacturing to distribution to consumer. Now raw material, processing, manufacturing, transport, retail and consumer. Is it clear? The definition of supply chain. For example, you have to make a smartphone and the government has started production linked incentive given to smartphones. You need lithium from Chile, you need chips from Taiwan, you need assembly from China and Vietnam, and then it may be sold in India if India doesn't have the supply chain. Let's talk about fertilizer. There are natural gas needed, then chemical processing and the fertilizer plants, and then it will reach to farmers. Now let's look at pharmaceuticals. Active pharmaceutical ingredients, though India is the world's back pharmacy, but again we are dependent on China for 70% of active pharmaceutical ingredients. Then Indian pharma companies are manufacturing medicines and then it is exported global. But what will happen if China is closing this API? If China refuses to give us active pharmaceutical ingredients, which is the basic constituent for producing medicines. So entire supply chain will collapse. In the same way, the food web or the food chain may collapse because of the elimination of one particular species. Now look at the key insight. Disruption at any stage will collapse the entire supply chain, and that's what this article is all about. Now India's supply chain. What are India's supply chain vulnerability? India deeply embedded in global supply chain. Now, heavy reliance on imports of raw material and intermediaries is one of the biggest risks of India's supply chain. Now, critical dependence in terms of energy, we have 85% crude oil imports, we have 50% gas imports, we are vulnerable for geopolitical shock, which we can see with the closure of a state of Hormuz. Now, in terms of pharmaceuticals, we have 65 to 70% APIs imported mainly from China, and then there is a risk to health security. We have another elections. Let's talk about electronics, not elections. High dependence on imports, semiconductors, display units from Taiwan, which is limiting our manufacturing competence. If you talk about agriculture, we are import dependent in oil, pulses, fertilizer imports, which impacts inflation and rural economy. Now, if you talk about manufacturing, we are importing 34% of raw material, intermediary 31%, capital goods 24%, and consumer goods only 12%. So our manufacturing sector is also dependent on external supports or imports, especially in raw material. Now, what the editorial says, editorial said that globalization has made us efficient, but at the same time it has also made us vulnerable. Interdependency is also creating vulnerabilities. Now, recent crisis, which is West Asian geopolitics, it shows that how disruptions ripple across economy and different sectors of economy, especially if the country is import dependent. Now, core argument is interdependence is beneficial, but at the same time it increases the risk taking capacity of a country. Now, the key areas of concern. The first is energy security. Oil price shock leading to inflation and fiscal pressure. Every $10 rise will lead to 13 to 14% billion import increase, which will lead to inflation risk and GDP slowdown by 0.2 to 3%. Now, food security. Import dependence will lead to inflation risk. It will impact the rural livelihood, and it will also create a problem for the people who are marginalized. Now, we are already import dependent in terms of edible oils, agri pulses and fertilizer, and this story is coming from a country where 45% labor force is involved in agriculture sector, contributing 14% to the GDP. So this situation becomes grim. The another argument says in manufacturing, import heavy inputs. We are import dependent when it comes in terms of manufacturing. That's why we are having difficulty in competing with China. So import heavy inputs leads to production disruption, which will lead to weak domestic ecosystem. Now, raw material concentration, lithium, cobalt, rare earth are concentrated globally, and they are vulnerable for any kind of disruption. Now, how to secure India's supply chain? We can secure by diversification. We can have multiple sourcing countries, and we can have reducing dependence on China. For that, we have joined Pax Silica. Right? Now, what the article says, what the author says, we have to go for diversification from multiple sourcing countries, reducing Chinese dependence. At the same time, we have to build our domestic capacities in API manufacturing, in semiconductor ecosystem and industrial machinery. In terms of energy, we have to go for renewable energy expansion and strategic petroleum reserves as well. Now, in terms of food security, we have to go for from the rice and wheat binary to the crop diversification. We should go for oil seed mission, and we should increase the buffer stock to meet any contingency. Now, in terms of strategic partnership, instead of being dependent on China, we should go for Africa, Latin America countries, and this was going to be a part of global south, and we should go for the long term supply agreement with these countries. Now, the author says that there must be an industrial policy shift as well, because if we do not formulate policies according to the global situation, right, what will happen? The policies will fail. So we should move beyond final assembly. We should focus on intermediary and upstream sectors. In terms of technology, we should go for input efficient production and recycling, and paying attention to circular economy. Circular economy. I will suggest you to understand the definition or learn the definition of circular economy. Now, what are the reforms required according to the author? It says that we should go for the fertilizer sector reforms, domestic mineral exploration, reduce import intensity, and build integrated supply chain ecosystem. Now, what is the warning here? The warning says over dependence on single country will lead to risk. Ignoring upstream industries, right? We are good in terms of upstream, downstream industries, but we should go for the upstream industries such as semiconductors. Lack of storage and buffer is required is one concern, and energy security. So this is how this article talks about how vulnerable India is in terms of supply chain and its disruption, and how India can control or minimize the impact of supply chain disruption and its impact on Indian economy. So thank you so much. Wish you a wonderful day ahead. Jai Hind, Jai Bharat.